You want to talk about real change. You want to talk about real growth. You want to talk about real dollars back. The best investment, the biggest growth opportunity right now is women's sports.
As someone who's a die-hard Detroit sports fan, it's been pretty easy to notice that Caitlin Clark would be a great add to the Detroit Pistons at this point. If you don't know, the Detroit Pistons play basketball and are historically awful this year. Caitlin Clark, on the other hand, is incredible at basketball and just broke the NCAA all-time women's scoring record. It's been all over the headlines, and Caitlin Clark, for good reason, has been right in the news cycle alongside the NBA All-Star Game. To understand the future of women's sports and what innovations are happening in it, I had the privilege of talking to Fielding Kidd Jamieson, who has been at the forefront of all of this. Fielding was a college athlete at Yale who ended up finding her way to helping to lead innovation at NBC Universal and Comcast, and most recently was a managing director at RGA Ventures, where she led a venture studio that was focused on women and sports. Fielding's passion for this space is incredibly noticeable, and one of the things I appreciate about her. Thankfully, you get to see that passion in this interview.
You were a college athlete at Yale. You've been in sports media and innovation, and now you are a managing director and investing, and especially doing a venture studio for women's sports. So, but before we get into all of that, like, was there anything that early on you're like, "Ooh, this started me on this pathway," or any early influences towards this type of work?
Honestly, I don't think my pathway necessarily lent itself to being an entrepreneur or being in the startup world, but I think as I look back, I think actually being an athlete helped me. So a lot of times when you're an athlete, there's a saying that a lot of coaches will say to you throughout your career, which is never settle. And the idea is that you are always striving to be better at something that you are doing on the field or off the field. And so when I got to the professional workforce, I think I brought that mentality with me. And especially working at NBC Universal, which was my first job, and Comcast had just come in and was the new parent company, and they were a technology forward organization, and NBC at the time wasn't. And so Comcast was trying to kind of start to infuse that tech forward thinking into NBC, and it was a really exciting time to be there. But for me, I just kept being drawn to this idea of doing things differently. And so that led me to looking at emerging technology. That led me to looking at new platforms and services. That led me to just the idea of, again, finding people that were doing things differently. So, of course, that mentality, if you know anything about entrepreneurship and startups, that of course led me to the startup world. So, I think it was just that mentality of, yes, things might be fine now. That was back in the days of like linear television, right? And now we've seen where linear television has gone. I'm a big believer that like we will eventually get back to cable 2.0, because I think a lot of times what happens with technology is that we come in, we break up like one big item, whatever that is. And that right now, that was cable. We go out, we create a ton of streaming platforms, and then slowly and surely, a couple will bubble up to the top, and win, and then frankly, there's some sort of consolidation, there that happens. So, I think that, it's exciting it was an exciting time to be there, and ultimately, when we look at these types of new technologies and things, that's what was really attracting me to that entrepreneurship world.
With that, so would you say you more fell into this line of work, or was there like any particular moment that you're like, "Ooh, this is what I want to do now?" Right? Because I think, right, going from sports athlete to media, right,
Sure.
that's like not it's a common pathway for a lot of college athletes is to go into media. But I think the way you've approached it has been different because it's gone from media, but then into like the innovation side of it too.
Yeah, I really was almost less on the media side and was really more on the technology side that was holding up all of the media, right? So I was in the back of that. I wasn't going to any of the fun, glamorous parties. I was like in control rooms and in product labs with engineers and all of that on the media side, which was great and very fun. And honestly, I learned so much during that time. So I don't think there was necessarily like a moment or a light bulb moment where I was like, "This is my path." What I did learn, though, there certainly was a light bulb moment around how to work in this space. So for a long time, being at a large organization, I was working at what is now would be referred to more as like an innovation lab. And I was focused on doing the best by my company, NBC. I was focused on finding new products and platforms and services and technologies to bring into the company for us to use our IP on to produce new products, services, and platforms to our customers. So, to be honest with you, when I was meeting with startups that I felt like could help us get there, my mentality going into the meeting was what is going to be best for me? What is going to be best for NBC? And I was not thinking at all about the person sitting across from me in that room. I was very focused on what they were presenting to me, which was their product service platform, right? It took another woman at Comcast, who brought me over actually from the NBC side to the Comcast side to build what is now Lift Labs, which is the front door for startups to engage with Comcast and NBC Universal. It took her to find me, bring me over to help build that, which was super exciting time, brand new business unit within Comcast, new space in Philadelphia, all these amazing things. She was very focused on the person, the entrepreneur behind those product services and platforms, the company. And when I realized how important it was in these especially these early stage companies to understand the founder, to understand the people behind the company, and to really be able to tap in and try to help those people and to not just come in as a massive organization and basically say, "Great, we like this tech, we'll pay you some money for it, and we'll move on," right? That was not how we were gonna win. That was not how Comcast NBC was gonna win in this space. We needed to be a partner, and we needed to be a partner and show up for that community in more than just saying, we will sign an MSA and then, pay you some money and hopefully be a customer, which is great, and we want that, but there's also so much more that we could be doing, and so for me, that was a major light bulb moment of just how to engage and think about startups, entrepreneurs, frankly, venture capital, all of it, right? So that was, that served me well, and frankly, it served me well beyond just startups. Knowing the person that you're sitting across from on a personal level, can be really come in, it can really come in handy, during conversations.
I think that's like one of the misunderstood, like at least for me, it was like a naive part too, like getting started because you're like, oh, like everything's just tech. And I think a lot of like the assumptions that you make is that business is just cutthroat and all these different things, but it's so relationship driven, especially the innovation world where it's a smaller circle that I think we all give it credit for. And it's a right, there's a lot of people interested in it, but like in terms of people actually making things happen, it's a smaller circle. So I guess how does that approach, right? In terms of what you're doing now, which is running a venture studio, like how is like looking at like, embedding people and like really the relationship piece of it, how does that look today, like for you as you're working with maybe different entrepreneurs and different innovators?
In terms of kind of building those relationships.
Yeah, what would be like the biggest differences between, like maybe if you were taking the old approach that you took to like now, like is it completely different or like what are the differences and similarities to it?
Absolutely. No, it's totally different from I think where I started. And again, I'm also, I've grown and before I was really looking for certain pieces to plug into a larger machine and the work that I was doing at RGA Ventures and Trailblazer Venture Studio, that was a couple of things coming together, right? That was this idea of working closely with startups, but from like three sources of capital we always talked about with that studio. There's relationship capital. So the idea of A, getting to know each other, but then B, leveraging our relationships to help these companies. B, creative capital. So that was infusing RGA's creative talent to actually like get in, and that included me, like get into the weeds with these companies and really be, like, actually a part of their team, and either creating new strategic plans, identifying white space opportunities, putting together competitive analysis, and then taking all of that and then layering on top like messaging, user experience, logo design, colors, like all of this amazing stuff on the creative side. And then the third bucket was financial capital. And so now when we were, looking for companies to invest for Trailblazer Venture Studio, we were focused on companies that sat at the intersection of women and sports. For us, that meant any company did not have to be female founded, but any company that was putting women as of equal importance to men in their sports tech startup, essentially. We ended up with, 9 investments, but we looked very differently at those companies, and especially at the level that we were investing. This is early stage investing, and when you're investing in early stage, you're investing in the person. You are the product will change. It's supposed to change. It's supposed to evolve. They're supposed to be, getting user feedback, changing things, tweaking things. What shouldn't change is the core. What should not change is their purpose. What should not change is their mission. And most 95% of the time, the purpose and the mission is founder driven. And so for me, it's very important to look at and get to know the people behind these companies when you are making these investments because you're in it for the long haul. Like venture capital is not for the faint of heart. These are 8 to 10 year returns we're talking, right? And they can be amazingly big, um, but they also can be average. And you have to think about that, like, do you want to sit in this rocket ship with someone for the next 8 years? 'Cause that's what you're signing up for, and I say rocket ship because hopefully, you're going straight up, but that's not always the case, and there are gonna be some serious bumps along the way, and are you willing to sit with this person throughout all of that? Because if you're not, then you should not be investing, you should not be an investor in that company, and again, I really am speaking especially to the early stage. I'm talking pre-seed, seed, Series A. I think once you get past that, a lot of it is really more economics and financial opportunity. Of course, they need some other help too, but that's really where they need the most help. But for these early stage companies, it's so much more than financial capital that's needed.
Okay, timeout. I wanted to just let you know that if you're looking to start your own venture, we have a free course at Station all about it. It'll help you get your foundation right with your own venture, especially if you're looking to be a bootstrapped venture. Again, it's completely free. Check it out in the description of this episode. Short timeout over, back to the interview.
One of the things that even looking at your career is like, it seems like the mission piece is like the really important piece. It's all over your LinkedIn of being like, hey, I'm focused on women, sports, and tech. These are the things I care about and like people investing in that. So with that, right, there's a lot of traction happening, especially around women's sports. Adam Silver was getting interviewed yesterday about, hey, like we actually have a full TV package instead of being like these other sports where it's, they get, 100 days of the year for TV with the NBA and WNBA, right? It's 300 days of TV, and that's a way different TV package and things like that. So, and then also like Caitlin Clark and all these different, you're seeing more of these athletes. Sabrina Nescu doing 3-point shootout with Steph Curry this weekend, right? There's a lot of different, I think women's, especially WNBA, is really starting to take off. So, from your perspective, like, how do you see like the future of women's sports, like really moving forward?
Oh man, loaded question. I think there's a couple of things. I think for me, what I am very focused on is I am a mom of 2 young boys. And the future that I see is that they never know that there was a stigma with women's sports and being a women athlete. They never know that women sports were never given the same investment, media attention, sold equally to their male counterparts. They will just not know that world, right? They will know a world where we treat athletes, regardless of their gender, as athletes and honor those successes. And honor the game and be excited by that. And so it's amazing the growth that we're seeing, but we're just at the beginning. We're really like, we're just at the beginning. And a lot of us that are in this space are constantly talking about like, how do we make sure this is not a blip? This cannot be a blip in the media radar. Like, we have to continue the growth. And what are we all collectively doing about that? And I sit in these amazing rooms with incredible men and women there who are talking about how do we continue this investment. And what's been fantastic is we've seen incredible investment pour in at the top. We've seen investment happening at the league level, the team level. We're seeing real investors come into the games. These are not family organizations. These are real investors who are looking for real returns. So, in order to make sure that we are giving them those real returns and to encourage the market to do what it does best, which is reward and then reinvest, we also need to invest in the rest of the infrastructure. So, women's sports, people say often, oh, they have an opportunity to do it differently. They're not tied to legacy media rights. They're not tied to legacy tech platforms. They haven't signed crazy, 50-year deals, which some people have in the past, right? But the problem is when you then look at the options for where women's sports can get media partners from and get technology partners from and get apparel partners from and retail and vendors and all these things, a lot of that actually hasn't changed. So it is a lot of the same people that are holding up men's sports organizations that are also holding up women's. And so what we need to do, and those organizations, though, that have been built to kind of hold up that top of the pyramid, they have been built for men, and they have built most of the time by men. And when you have that mentality, like, women are not men, right? And so it is different. The NFL is experiencing this right now. There's surge of female viewership due to one amazing woman, Taylor Swift, right? Like, I'm very interested to see, like, they had a crazy lift from the Super Bowl from women. They've never been able to have that lift no matter what they have done. What are they gonna do with it? That's what like, that's what I'm interested in. It's like, what are you going to do with that? Are you gonna actually start marketing towards women? Are you gonna start making the game more relatable? Are you gonna start, getting women excited to go to games, be at games, talk about them? Or are you gonna continue to kinda put women down because they can't name 15 players of a team that they support? Fandom looks differently across the board for a lot of different people, and it's not just women, by the way. It is basically anyone who was considered a casual fan. They were forgotten, and the avid fan was put on a pedestal. What's happened and what women's sports has really shown is actually the majority of people are in the casual fan. So let's cater to the casual fan. Let's make it relatable. Let's bring people in. Let's not be exclusive. And women do that best. And so that's what's exciting to me about women's sports is like a lot of people are getting excited about that, men, women, girls, and boys. And we're like, come one, come all. Like, bring everybody in. And so I think that that's an amazing mentality that women's sports has been able to showcase that I am hoping we will also see on the men's sports side. So I think the future is incredibly bright. I'm sure you can hear from the passion in my voice that I am very excited and passionate about this space because look, I think that at the end of the day, and I have this on my LinkedIn too, like, you wanna talk about real change, you wanna talk about real growth, you wanna talk about real dollars back, the best investment, the biggest growth opportunity right now is women's sports. So, that's what excites me. There's dollars starting to come in. We need more dollars. We need more media deals. We need more streaming services to step up, and we're continuing to see that, and so the trajectory looks very promising.
The stat that really blew my mind in this was like the growth of the WNBA this year because like it was a 20% TV growth, which is that's big. Those are big numbers that you're talking about, and then they're gonna go negotiate for a new TV deal. Like that's a selling point onto itself. And I totally agree with you on the casual fan, right? Like you look at Super Bowl numbers, right? Like people are there if they call it the Usher concert with the football game, all these different things. So for sure being more, inclusive and, yes, there's always going to be some like, super fans that are super into nerds and all the things. That's not everyone, right? That's going to be like the front end, in terms of even like an early adoption curve, right? They're going to be like the front end of that. I guess, is there any like types of like ventures or projects even within this space that you're like, ooh, I think this will be the future, or like this has a chance to really kind of be the really inflected point or really push women's sports? even further.
Well, I'm biased a little bit, obviously, to the companies that I've worked with and that I'm really close with. There's a couple of leaders in this space. One I'm repping now, Angel City. I mean, they completely changed, and they just completely changed the game. I think for women's sports for the better. From a to be an individual team, to have done what they did, and again, I come back to like they were so inclusive from the get go. They were like just in terms of raising capital to invest in the team. I mean, it's incredible how many people they have on their cap table, and they went about that in a way to say, like, "We want athletes, we want investors, we want traditional family offices, we want all these people to come together." And when you create that, people really feel like they're a part of something. So then everyone's talking about it, and the buzz is starting. And before Angel City even touched the field, they were the number 1 NWSL team that was being talked about, right? So, I think that you look at that and you say, "Okay, what can we, learn from that?" Right? So I think, they're powerhouse in that space. And then, of course, it's looking at the companies that said, "Listen, I am tired of these incumbents not doing it, so we're gonna do it." So you look at media companies like The Gist, uh, who had started off doing a newsletter about sports that was focused on, again, more of a female audience, but I'll also just say casual fan audience. They spoke to fans, casual fans, in a way that you could digest what was going on in sports because sports, listen, knowing sports and be able to talk sports, that's social currency. That is social currency. And for a very long time, women have been left out of those conversations because they weren't keeping up, right? It's kind of the old school, like chat around the water cooler. And so the GIST wanted to change that. And so they went after that and they've done an incredible job and they've amassed an amazingly loyal audience because women are very loyal to brands that they feel are speaking to them and represent them well. And so they've amassed this incredible audience. They have new newsletters, they have podcasts. They're truly a now full kind of media company, right? So you have them out there. You have Together, another startup we invested in, brought together by 4 Olympians, but really leading the way to say, like, we aren't people aren't going to be invested in women's sports if they don't know the women athletes behind those sports, right? So, we gotta tell those stories. We gotta get out there. No one's doing that, and we're gonna create content, but then also partner with massive, studios and content creators to get out there and produce content around women's stories. You have Just Women's Sports, another media company out there who is only talking, as the name applies, about women's sports. And they are going after an area where, look, like big media players weren't doing their jobs and they weren't covering it. And they left this opportunity. And as you know, as a previous entrepreneur, like when entrepreneurs and people who have a mission and a dream see an opportunity, they're gonna go for it, right? And that's what we've seen. That's what's exciting to me is when you start to see startups swirl in a space, that's a good sign that there's about to be some disruption. And disruption leads to innovation, it leads to change, it leads to new things. So I think that is all pushing all of these organizations as well to be better, to do better. Like, so, there's so many other organizations out there. IDA, another like they produced the first women's soccer cleat. Let's let that sink in. It is 2024 and they started a while ago, but like I grew up playing soccer. When I went to the store and I went to the girls section and I went to the women's section when I was older, I thought I was buying a women's cleat. And it turned out I was buying a cleat that was solely designed and based on a men's foot and their body type that was, pink it and shrink it. It was whatever new color that like would appear, more feminine. And that's what I was wearing. And Ida has torn that apart and they have redesigned the shoe from the ground up solely based on women's physiology. So that is really exciting to me. Like that's the kind of thing where you get so excited and like I feel like my passions are merging, which is this idea of like startups and entrepreneurship and founders pushing the envelope in a space where it needed to be pushed.
So there's a lot going on right there, and you're like obviously the passion, even you can see the energy just on the screen. So like when you're done with this work, like what do you hope the impact is? Like what do you hope to be able to say, like, hey, when you end, like this is the impact I think I had on all this.
I really just want to be able to say that I was a small part in this growth and in this opportunity. Again, like, I think for me, it comes back to even my boys and to say, like, look, like, they you don't know that you are putting women on like women athletes on an equal pedestal as men. Your media coverage is showing that, your Instagram feeds or whatever going to be the new technology at that point, or your VR headsets or whatever are filled equally with like men and women and news and culture and sports and just all of this, combined. And so that's what I hope is I am just continue to be a part of this growth and can contribute positively to this. I take something very seriously that Billie Jean King said when we were partnered on the Trailblazer Venture Studio. Obviously, an amazing hero of mine and so many women who played sports in college because of her work with Title IX, and frankly gave us that opportunity to do that. And I asked her one time when I was having a hard week. It was just a hard week in the news cycle for women. It was a hard week, I saw a post about a women athlete and just, like, the disgusting comments that were underneath it. And I was like, "How do you have been fighting for decades and decades, decades upon decades. How do you keep up the fight?" And she always just said, you can't take it personally. And so for me, that's something that I have really taken to heart and just want to continue to be positive and to push this space in a very positive way, and to not get bogged down in the negativity of it.
The comments are gross, even as a man, and seeing even like on Twitter and seeing some of the creators that were reposting this week about Valentine's Day. So I hear you. It's a wild experience, but glad we have people like you and Blasian King to be really pushing things forward. So thank you for your work. If people wanted to learn more about what you're up to and maybe some of the companies you've mentioned, is there a place they can go to?
Honestly, like, just I would encourage you to, like, do your homework, follow all of the companies that I mentioned, get outside your comfort zone. Like, if you don't follow a predominantly women's sports account on whatever accounts, on whatever, platform you prefer, like, do that. Start doing that. Expose yourself to do that. You probably if you're vaguely a sports fan, you probably follow, like, ESPN, Front Office Sports, or something like that. So follow the gist, follow Together, follow Just Women's Sports, follow IDA, follow any of these companies that are out there telling these stories, just so you're aware of it. And I think that that's what's beautiful about social media. There's a lot of negative things about social media, and that's for another time. But for me, what's been so interesting about for sports, and again, it comes back to the casual fan, is that so many of us are getting our news from one or two platforms. But the way that that news is coming through on like an Instagram and a Twitter and whatever is like you're seeing like a picture of like your friend who just got married. And then you're seeing a picture from NBC News about a breaking news story. And then you're also seeing like Caitlin Clark and the fact that she's going to break the record today, right? So sports has really become even more so than ever infused with culture. And so that's where you're getting this like exciting swell, I think, around the casual fan because they can easily keep up with the storylines that are being presented to them as equally as these other stories are. So when you think about that, like, that's really interesting from a psyche perspective that, like, you're just on a platform and, like, you're seeing a picture of Caitlin Clark breaking the record, but that's of equal, that's pretty unequal pedestal as, like, your friend who just got married, right? And again, you might not think about that, but the idea is that, like, that information was presented the exact same. It's a picture and a caption. And so that's, like, super interesting to me about, these platforms and thinking about that. So, yeah, I'm excited for kind of that to continue and again, there's this swell of the casual fan.
One of the moments for me where it kind of hit was when, so I'm a Detroit Pistons fan, and when they're in their tanking mode, everyone was tweeting, "Do they know Cannon Clark isn't available in the NBA draft this year?" Which was like, okay, these worlds are, they're colliding, and Caitlin Clark was all over it. It was Caitlin
Right.
Clark and the Detroit Pistons losing streak underneath them. So totally agree that I think the headlines are finally catching up, and there's some really cool, even like dynamics with that the media companies trying to play with a little bit, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's exciting. This crossover is great. Like, I'm honestly the Sabrina Ionescu shootout that'll be happening. Like, is that our generation's version of the battle of the sexes? Like, it might be, but it's not aggressive and it's not done in a like has to be better than him. Like they're just being put on an equal pedestal and going head to head. I think that that's awesome. Like I think we need more of that, and we're seeing a lot of crossover. And I'll give the NBA a lot of credit. Like those men have stepped up for their women counterparts in a massive way in the last couple of years, and it is can be as simple is buying a WNBA hoodie and just wearing it, right? And so I think that that is great. I think that they're taking a page out. I think tennis has always been, and again, goes back to Billy, but like those men, though, have sat at press conferences and been asked questions like, "Oh, how does it feel to be the most winningest male winningest tennis player?" And they're correcting them and saying, "You mean male tennis player, right?" And that's what we need. So it's not just women that need to be here, it's also men. We need everybody to basically show that, like, the end of the day, like, the athletes are great, the sports are fantastic. Sports are equally as amazing for youth girls as they are for youth boys. We need to protect that, and we need to grow that.
Fielding is awesome. If you think she's great, leave a comment or sign up for the station newsletter in the description and let me know what you thought of the episode there. Thanks for watching and listening.